About 12 years ago, I was about 38 years old, sitting in my office. My assistant stuck her head in and said, "You're going to be here in an hour. I've got an important meeting." I looked up. I was like, "Well, what is it?" And she said, "Well, Ellison McIntosh is driving down from Lexington, North Carolina, which is where I grew up, and he'd be here in an hour. It was important that I was there." I remembered Ellison back from when I used to collect mortgages as a young boy. I did that from the age of 12 till I went off to school, and I'd remembered Ellison. Hope nothing tragic had happened in his life. I'm Clay Grubb, CEO of Grubb Properties. Grubb Properties is a company known for two things: its Link Apartments brand and its compassion. My father built this company providing homes in red line neighborhoods. He did this without any type of markup on those home loans. Many of you may ask, what are red line neighborhoods? Red line neighborhoods were basically neighborhoods where banks used to discriminate. They were primarily African American neighborhoods, and the banks would not provide home loans because you lived in that neighborhood or because of the color of your skin. I heard a disturbing statistic recently that between 1934 and 1968, every single home loan in America, or 98% of every home loan in America, went to somebody white. I always joked that my father was able to justify a not-for-profit finance division because he broke all the child labor laws. And so at age 12, he put me in there doing amortization schedules by hand. We didn't have any computer back then, and actually collecting mortgages. And it was a job that I executed with pride, thoroughness, and toughness. However, it would ground me in a real appreciation for compassion for our fellow Americans. Out of the hundreds of mortgages that we provided to folks who otherwise would not have had that opportunity to realize the American dream, almost every one of them performed and achieved their dream. However, these folks lived paycheck to paycheck, many working in factories, and so there were bumps along the road, and I had remembered working through a bump with Ellison McIntosh. You know, a great example for a lot of these folks were if you broke your leg, you couldn't go into the factory. Well, instead of ruthlessly penalizing folks for not being able to make their mortgage payments, my father compassionately would waive 2 or 3 months worth of payments, knowing that they would need that income to get their lives back started. And then we would redo their amortization schedules, adding maybe $10 or $15 a month to their mortgage. These homeowners were gracious for these accommodations, and many took pride in getting their payments in timely. Today, Grubb Properties no longer builds homes. We no longer provide mortgages, but we do stay very focused on the housing industry, and we are focused on trying to provide housing for those folks that are trying to improve their lives. We do this through our Link Apartments brand, where our primary focus is to create the best value in urban areas. Why do we choose urban areas? One, urban areas are extremely efficient communities for services. A great example is I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. It costs $180. Example is just it costs $180 to pick up trash every month at a single family home. But the city of Charlotte can do it for $58 a month for every apartment. Two, it's extremely convenient to be living in these urban areas. They have much greater access to employment opportunities for economic mobility purposes, as well as entertainment. And three, it's highly desirable because the economic mobility it provides is also the most sustainable option for our planet and our limited resources. However, the biggest obstacle to living in urban areas is the cost. Today, it's the cost of rent to create new product. It's the cost of land to secure opportunities to develop new housing. And it's the actual cost of construction for apartments. At Grubb Properties, we become laser focused on driving down the cost for new urban housing. Today, 40% of Americans cannot afford the average price of a new apartment. 80% of Americans can't afford the average price of a new home. That's 40% of Americans cannot afford the average price of a new apartment. 80% can't afford the average price of a new home. We have a massive crisis on our hands. At Grubb Properties, we have 58 creative levers that we pull to try to lower those costs. One of the most innovative ones is shared parking. And in urban areas, parking is very expensive. The average cost of a parking spot in a above-ground garage is $25,000. If you put a parking spot below ground, it's $50,000 for just a parking spot. We won't build any new apartment communities unless we can combine them with office buildings that will reduce the amount of parking. So a typical office building may require 350 parking spaces. A typical apartment community may require 350 parking spaces. That's 700 spaces. When we combine them and share that, we can reduce over 200 of those parking spaces, reducing over $4 million of construction costs. But more importantly, the cost of managing one of those garages is about the same, whether it's 500 spaces or 350, but we're now sharing it and reducing that operating cost by 70%. The other thing is that we are highly efficient in our floor plans. We only build 6 floor plans, and we're really trying to bring that down to a science. The average size of a large floor plan today is 637 square feet. That's our large one-bedroom. 10 years ago, the average size of our one-bedroom was 850. We thank flat-screen TVs and stackable washer and dryers and those things as it feels very comfortable and spacious as it has before. Our final lever, though, that I like to talk about isn't really a lever at all. And that brings back to our compassion as a company that really cuts to the heart of our culture. And that's that we have created a program where if you live in one of our apartments for 5 years or longer, we'll cap your rent at the CPI index from that point forward. And we can do that for a number of reasons. One, we've saved a ton of turn costs by having the same person live there. But two, we're trying to create community and authentic environments. And one of my favorite stories was when I moved to Charlotte. I was at dinner with my attorney, and he's like, "Oh, you own those Glen Lennox apartments?" He's like, "I used to live there. I had 3 addresses there. 2 of my kids were there." And I said, "Where'd you live?" He goes, "That was 35 years ago. I can't remember." And then he said, "You know, that's funny. Actually, I remember I lived at 11 Hamilton." I said, "Really?" I said, "Who was your neighbor?" He's like, "You got to be kidding me." And he thought for a minute. He's like, "Actually, you know, it's funny. The golf coach was my neighbor." I said, "Mr. Kenny?" He goes, "Yeah, how did you know? That was 35 years ago." I said, "Well, he still lives there." And so as part of the Grubb Properties team, I'm really proud of our team members, what they do to improve the lives of our residents and tenants and the communities that we're in. But however, running such a company is very demanding. And so when Ellis and McIntosh showed up at my office, I told my assistant, "Hey, why don't you handle this? You can go meet with him. I'm sure you know what to do and how to accommodate him." And she said, "No, you need to go meet with him." And so I walked in the conference room, and there was Ellison, his 2 children, and 3 of his grandchildren. He stood up, shook my hand, and handed me a check. And it was his 360th check. He now owned his home outright, no liens, nothing else. Set a really incredible example for his children, his grandchildren. He had achieved the American dream. And I realized how impactful my father had been on so many families. I hope one day my kids can witness the benefit of the legacy I'm trying to sustain in my father's memory and bring that type of compassion that he taught me into their working lives. Thank you for allowing me to share my story, and I hope that it'll help inspire you to bring compassion into your life.